Modern nations are connected by everything from highways to railways, seaports to airports, pipelines for oil to pipelines for electrons, and economic, political, and logistical systems that allow the country to act as one interconnected organism. Every well-developed nation these days has a way to extract resources, provide basic resources for its citizens, import and export masses of stuff from other countries on a regular schedule, and do so over vast distances like it's nothing. But large countries like this are nothing new. So how was this done in ancient times? Some empires in history were able to last several centuries, if not millennia, whereas others expanded quickly, burned all their energy, and fell apart just as fast. So when an empire in the ancient world actually got it right, how did they hold themselves together? If you lived in a time before Europeans discovered the actual Amazon, how would you go about getting stuff from faraway places? The Roman Empire is arguably the best example to show how logistics worked in the ancient world. Plus, it's what'll probably get more people to click on this video. Rome was far from the largest empire in human history, but to manage a realm comparable in size to the modern United States with Iron Age technology for several hundred years, you definitely need to know how to run the place. Easily one of the most consequential and most famous examples of what held the empire together was the series of roads that stretched across the empire's territory. In all, the Romans built around 80,000 kilometers of highways connecting the cities of the empire, from Antiochia to Asturica to Eboracum, all without dooming their cities to the blight of chariot-dependent infrastructure, though these highways would have been built more for transporting lighter loads or to resupply the military or for the cursus publicus, a pony express-like system of horse relays where messages could be sent from the edge of the empire to Rome in mere days. Although the Romans weren't the first to use roads in this way, as the Achaemenid Empire's system of royal roads allowed messengers to travel from Sardis to Susa in 9 days, when a journey between these cities normally took 90. Even with this impressive series of roads though, oftentimes the best routes between two cities would have been via ship, even if the distance was technically longer, especially if you wanted to carry more than a few tons of stuff. I touched more on this in a video I made last year, no, almost 2 years ago, Jesus Christ. But when you have the entire Mediterranean and Black Seas within your realm, so much so that you like to call it sea hours, you might as well use it, what with the amount of stuff you can carry on ships and the fact that you don't really need a rest stop until you get to your destination. The Corbata was the most ubiquitous merchant ship sailing the seas of the Roman Empire and even venturing as far as India. Depending on their size, these ships could carry anywhere from 70 to 350 tons of cargo, be it in the form of crates, passengers who probably had to sleep on the deck and bring their own tents, or amphorae, which were sort of like the cardboard boxes of the ancient Mediterranean, but made of clay, and for transporting liquids. The most important of which being olive oil, which is used in everything from cooking to medicine to lighting to religious rituals, with the average Roman thought to have consumed 20 liters of this stuff every year. Interestingly, once a ship had delivered its cargo to its destination and the oil had been already used, they would often dump the amphorae overboard rather than go back weighed down by empty amphorae, which shows just how cheap and ubiquitous they were. With all this, Rome could set up a series of supply chains across the breadth of the ancient world, with lead and tin from Britain, wheat from Egypt and Carthage, gold and silver from Hispania, high-skilled slaves from Greece, and even further afield, with exotic animals from Africa, spices from India, and silk from China. When it came to things that had to be done in smaller areas all across the empire, the Roman Empire would use the tried and tested method of dumping that responsibility on someone else. The best example of this is taxes, which was done a little differently than in modern times. Instead of the Roman government collecting a small amount from every citizen in the empire, a class known as the publicani would pay the state whatever they needed from a given province before going out themselves to collect the money from the estates and communities within said province, and maybe making a little profit if they were lucky, who knows. This was a practice known as tax farming. However, Emperor Augustus would discontinue this practice in favor of more direct taxation. But once Rome had made the transition from small Italian republic to Mediterranean-spanning empire, arguably the most important province in the entire empire became Egypt. If there's something complex civilization likes, it's predictability. And name a more predictable river than the Nile. Oh wait, actually there are probably loads more predictable rivers out there, but you get what I'm saying. The Nile Valley is one of the most fertile regions in the world, despite barely receiving any rain at all. This is in part due to the annual flooding of the river, which essentially refertilizes the soil, or at least it did until they put a stop to that in the 60s. Of course, the amount the Nile will flood in a given year could vary a lot, For this, they would measure the amount the river flooded year to year using Nilometers. Yes, that's what people today actually call them, which were essentially these large chambers where the level of the river's flooding could be measured and recorded. The Nile was also the perfect river for transportation, as the Nile flows northward, yet the winds tend to blow southward, or from the north, as the weather nerds like to put it, making it almost comically easy to traverse the Nile. Literally just put up your sail if you want to go south, and don't do that if you want to go north. And if you want to go east or west, no you don't. This is Egypt we're talking about. But the Egyptians did build a series of canals, essentially spreading the water out in a web, both for irrigation and transport. For a country so famous for its deserts, you could go basically anywhere in ancient Egypt by riverboat. There's even evidence of a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, dating all the way back to the Middle Kingdom period. Not to be confused with this Middle Kingdom. This allowed ruling dynasties to project power up and down the river just as easily as grain could be delivered, or taxed. With all this, Egypt grew to be the breadbasket of the ancient world, or well, one of them, often producing a surplus of food, which was either traded with their neighbors or stored in state-owned granaries, which were often protected by cats who hunted the mice within the granaries, presumably hence their place in Egyptian mythology. But what if you don't have access to the same sort of technology and infrastructure as Rome or Egypt or anywhere like that? What if your empire is high in the mountains, isolated from any other empire, and where the biggest domestic animal you have is the llama? Well, that is exactly the position the Inca found themselves in. The Inca Empire called itself Tawantinsuyu, meaning the four regions, with 4 states radiating in the 4 cardinal directions from the capital Cusco. Their empire was connected by an intricate series of footpaths, rope bridges, and mountainside staircases. While it might not have suited an empire like Rome, for the Tawantinsuyu, it worked well enough for them to administer a massive empire across the west coast of South America, manage trade, and build amazing wonders. In fact, this setup had some advantages. The Inca Empire spread north to south, meaning it encountered several different climate zones. In addition, their empire was also a lot more three-dimensional, with different settlements at vastly different elevations. While a civilization would normally want to avoid this arrangement at all costs, for the Tawantinsuyu, this actually had the advantage of allowing different regions to grow different sets of crops, so if one particular crop had a terrible year, it wouldn't affect the entire empire. But what about the Indian Ocean trade network? And what about the European colonial empires? What logistical efforts were needed to keep those afloat? Boats. If you want to learn more about that, stay tuned for part 2.